Trigger warning. The subject of today's video committed SA on a minor. While I do not go into detail of the charges, I do reference what occurred. In addition, I read letters of support that were written for today's subject, in which some include victim blaming.
Why don't you do this? Why don't you think of the worst stuff that someone can do to somebody as a sexual assault, and that'll answer your question.
So some people and I were talking the other day. In recent weeks, there has been pretty much nonstop bullying, adding on Twitter of a certain celeb who is doing their best to go through a healing process and who is doing their best to just live their life. And we were talking about the fact that there are these people on the internet that choose to bully someone who is a human being who has owned up to mistakes and is now trying to better themselves so that they can be a better person for not only themselves, but for everyone else around them. They would rather bully that person than go after, say, actual monsters that exist on this earth. I'm talking about people that commit SA against minors, PDF files. I believe the reason why Drake Bell decided to tell his story was not only he felt comfortable telling it finally, but because it's so important to get it out there that this is a very real problem in Hollywood, that these children are very easily taken advantage of. These children, in some cases, are just handed over by their parents because the parents believe that the child is okay. Drake had even admitted, I believe it was in a podcast, that the whole reason that he broke and eventually said something to his mom was the fact that he was scared this was happening to someone else, to others. So I believe it is time that we address and make known the problem in Hollywood. So today we're going to talk about Brian Peck. He's the first one up. Now, a very handy dandy chart was made by the author of the article that I referenced just a couple of videos ago, Isabel, and I will link that information in the section below. So Isabel's document begins after Brian Peck's prison sentence. I wanted to go back a little further than that so that maybe we can piece together a bit more. And after getting a little bit more information from these people that I have been speaking with, I just found it very interesting. Now, the first time that something we really noticed was off was in the video of Brian Peck and Leonardo DiCaprio, and that was from the set of Growing Pains. Now, Brian Peck was an actor and a dialogue coach on that show. He played bit parts in just a few episodes, but that was his job. Dialogue coach. In the video with him and Leonardo DiCaprio, whether something happened or not, it's very uneasy watching Brian just kind of touching Leonardo, stroking his arm, after knowing now what we know that he did to Drake Bell. So I wanted to begin at that point. Now, no matter how you feel about him, I did find an article that was done on April 18th regarding Kirk Cameron recalling questionable encounters with Brian Peck while he was on the show. Cameron says, "I started acting when I was 9 years old. I began Growing Pains at 14 years old, and I was suspicious that that stuff was going on behind the curtains even when I was working on Growing Pains." Peck played several minor characters over the course of Growing Pains, which ran from 85 to 92. Cameron states, "There were several young boys like us that Peck interacted with on a regular basis, so it's shocking. It's sickening." When asked about Growing Pains behind-the-scenes footage included in Quiet on Set that shows Peck touching and rubbing young DiCaprio's arms, Cameron said, "That's the kind of thing you would see and make you pause and go, there's a little flag on the field, but not enough to prove something worse." The actor characterized Hollywood as an industry that tries to indemnify, exonerate the very PDF files that we say we want to get rid of, because they are PDF files. According to Cameron, Peck and others like him were beloved on the set. The consensus was these individuals were charming. They ingratiated themselves into their victims' lives and were generally likable people when they were putting the nice guy face on. It was like your spidey senses told you something's not right. They were handsy and physical in a smarmy kind of way, but not so overt that you could totally detect what was happening. Cameron suggested that Peck's surface-level affability was what compelled his co-stars like Alan Thicke and Joanna Kearns to write letters of support during the Bell trial. Cameron says nobody wants to believe that the fun, charming dialogue coach who's ingratiated himself into the lives of others, almost to the point of being a trusted family friend, would do something so wicked and evil. These children, like Drake Bell, they have scars that they will carry with them permanently throughout their life. He goes on to state, those people who did this stuff to these kids are the same kind of people in the industry today, still making twisted, sick, perverted material that's hurting children today, and they need to be completely rooted out and replaced. Now, like I said, think what you want about Kirk Cameron. I know that he has had questionable views and things to say, and that he is extremely pushy when it comes to his beliefs, but he is right on the money with this one. Now, speaking of Alan Thicke and Joanna Kearns, most of you have probably heard or read their letters, but let me go ahead and read them. This one is from Alan Thicke. Dear Judge Hoff, I am writing this to express my estimation of Brian Peck as an honorable, respectable, intelligent human being who apparently made a gigantic mistake which will haunt him for life. He made a gigantic mistake. Multiple times, but it was a gigantic mistake. Okay. I am honored to be regularly included in lists of America's favorite TV dads, an identity that I proudly carry throughout the country in writing about and lecturing to families on issues of parental concern. I am regarded as a published authority in this genre, and because I take that image and its responsibility very seriously, I would obviously be very careful about a character reference relating to children. Great way to talk yourself up there, Alan. Rest in peace. I worked with Brian Peck daily from 1987 through 1991 and found him to be a highly professional and maturing mentor of the young people on our television set. Because he was never inappropriate in any way around children, including my own 2 young sons, I was shocked and saddened to learn of the trouble he was in. Knowing him as I did, I also know beyond a doubt how remorseful he is and how dedicated and focused he will be on his rehabilitation. Now notice, with him stating before that Brian apparently made a gigantic mistake, and now stating knowing that Brian is remorseful and dedicated on his rehabilitation, leads you to believe that Alan Thicke knew exactly what the charges were and knew exactly what Brian Peck had done. Yet because Brian Peck was supposedly and apparently never inappropriate with any of the children on the Growing Pains set, including his own 2 sons, this was just a slip-up. Brian's integrity and self-respect have always been important to him, and this turn of events has been mortifying to him in ways that will only make him a better, stronger citizen in the future. It was mortifying for him. It was mortifying for him because he got caught. True mortification would be what Drake Bell had to go through at the hands of Brian Peck. I am convinced Brian will make a second chance last a lifetime, and I trust you will consider the people who have known him and hold him in high regard when you contemplate his punishment. Offering a sincere and heartfelt vote of confidence in Brian's future, I remain yours truly, Alan Thicke. So I'll be honest, that was the first time that I had read Alan Thicke's letter. And while it's not as disgusting and victim blaming as some of the others, it is no less disturbing and rage inducing because it is clear, like I said, that Alan Thicke knows Brian Peck did what he is being accused of. Nowhere in the letter is he stating that Brian Peck could never do that. Brian Peck would never harm a child. No, instead, he states, well, Brian will never do this again. Brian has learned his lesson. Okay, now the one from Joanna Kearns to the Honorable Michael Hoff. I have known Brian Peck for almost 18 years. He worked as a dialogue coach and stand-in on our television show, Growing Pains, in which I was one of the stars. We worked together for 7 years and have remained dear friends since the show ended in 1992. He has been a guest in my home on more occasions than I can count, and I have been a guest at his. You gotta wonder, if she was a guest at his, did she ever see the John Wayne Gacy painting? Did he show off his pen pal letters to her? And if so, was she not bothered by any of it? I have questions. Brian is both a good person and dear friend. He is gifted at his job. He helped our kids in the cast make it through each week by making it fun for them to learn. This was not easy to do, as they had a very difficult work schedule to juggle with schoolwork. They trusted him, and he was especially careful with that trust. He is a man of great integrity, and I was very grateful that we had someone as kind as Brian to work with our kids on a daily basis. This business can be hard on children, and he knew how to help them balance the pressure. In the 7 years we worked together, there was never a second of doubt about his appropriateness with the children he worked with. When I heard that Brian was arrested, I was shocked and saddened. While I cannot fully comprehend the charges against him, it is not in Brian's character to do anything unlawful or harmful to another person. I have never known Brian to engage in the type of illegal activity with which he is charged, and can only believe that there must have been some extreme situation or temptation exerted upon him to influence his actions. There we go, number 1 with victim blaming. Some extreme situation or temptation exerted. When it comes to someone that has admitted to essaying someone else, be it another adult or more horrifically a child, that's never appropriate. And I state this because she came out, if you saw Quiet on Set, she came out with a statement that she was misled about the allegations, the charges against him. Brian has talked to me about what happened and taken responsibility for his actions. Okay, so Brian did talk to you about what happened. It took courage to talk with me about his transgression, and I have no doubt in my mind that he will take whatever steps necessary to make sure something of this nature never happens again. To say that Brian is sorry for what he did is an understatement. There are no words to express the pain he feels for the terrible lapse in judgment he made. I'm sorry, for the pain that he feels? For the pain that Brian Peck feels? To do what he did to Drake Bell? I don't think he is able to feel anything. I am confident that if the court grants Brian probation, he will not let them down. She wanted him to get probation. Okay. He is a good man that made a mistake. Again, he made a mistake. Not a bad man who got caught. That's exactly what he is. That's exactly what he was. Brian, on his own initiative, has spent many hours in counseling, and I am sure that this is a much healthier and productive rehabilitation than jail time. I have been an actress for 30 years, although the past 5 years I have worked almost exclusively as a director. These people just really love to brag about themselves. I'm sorry. They're trying to lay groundwork for how reputable they are so that their word means more. In those years, I have worked with hundreds of people, and I can say without hesitation that Brian is one of the most honest and trustworthy people I have ever met. I would hire him today to work with children and young adults in my projects because I know he is excellent at his job. He cares about the people he works with, and most importantly, he can be trusted. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Joanna Kearns. Now, something that is interesting. I would hire him today to work with children and young adults. That right there tells me, Joanna, that you knew exactly what had happened. So don't tell us and don't tell Drake that you were misinformed of the charges. I don't care if Brian Peck sat there and told you that he had been seduced by a 15-year-old boy. Don't care, because if you believed that, you are just as sick and twisted as he is. Any sane, rational person knows that if someone who is a lot younger than you develops a crush on you, or tries to present themselves in a more mature way for you because they have a crush on you, it is your job as the adult to sit them down and tell them, this is wrong, this isn't going to happen. That's what a responsible and honest and upstanding adult does. So even if that was the tale that Brian spun to you, I can't. So those were the letters from the 2 stars of growing pains. Okay, now another thing about growing pains that I learned today by talking with someone else and doing a little bit more research. This is the time when Brian Peck met James Marsden. So James was on vacation when he was 16 years old, and he met Candace Cameron, and they started talking. And she invited James to come to LA for a vacation, for, just to stop in, see what LA is all about, check out the scene. And it was at that time that James met Kirk Cameron. He went on to the Growing Pains set, and he met Brian, who in turn introduced him to Leonardo DiCaprio. And I guess they became friends. So not only does Brian Peck have a 17 or 18-year-old Leonardo DiCaprio, who, let's be honest, he looked a lot younger than 17 or 18. Looking at that video, it just struck me how young Leonardo actually looked. But not only that, he had a 16-year-old James Marsden at his disposal now too, because James decided, hey, this is the kind of thing I want to do. Brian is the one that supported him in becoming an actor. Far be it from me to make any assumptions, but even if nothing untoward happened between Brian and James, doesn't mean that the brooming process didn't occur. Because you talked to James and he just thought the world of Brian. Brian was just the best. Brian was so supportive and even let James stay at his house. Now this was back in 91, 92 maybe. So he let James stay at his house, and James says nothing happened. So let's read James's letter. Dear Judge Hoff, my name is James Marsden, and I am very proud to say that I've been a close friend of Brian Peck's for about 14 years now. I am from Oklahoma originally, and I met Brian through an actor friend I was visiting one summer while still living in Oklahoma. Brian believed in my talent as an actor and encouraged my decision to move to Los Angeles and pursue this dream I had. I have been consistently working in Hollywood for all the 14 years I've lived here, and I can easily say that Brian is one of the reasons why I have been as successful as I have been in this industry. Brian has a love and passion for this industry unlike I have ever seen. He is also very intelligent and knows the way this business works. I'm sure he does. I was lucky enough to have been graced with Brian's guidance, uncommissioned guidance I might add, and support in pursuing an acting career. Brian has helped me work on audition material and has been almost an assistant to me since I began working, and never once did I pay him for any of it. He does these things because he enjoys it and he likes helping people. No agenda. I owe a lot to Brian for his time and energy in being a mentor to me through not only figuring out how to fit into this business, but also how to be a better person in life. I don't mean to dramatize this, but I am speaking wholeheartedly about a man whose heart is pure, and no matter what you're talking about, his intentions are always good. He has such an amazing capacity to care about people. This, I find, is very rare, especially in Hollywood. Brian genuinely cares about other human beings. While on jobs, he works with tremendous responsibility and professionalism. Brian is one of those people who, if he says he will meet you at 9, he is there at 9. So because he is timely, there's no way he could have done any of this maliciously because he knows how to be on time. I don't care if it's work or lunch on a Saturday. Brian is the one who scolded me when I tried to park in a handicap spot just to run in real quick. He made me move my car. I remember we actually got into an argument about it. It's obvious that Brian is a Boy Scout. He is also one of the few people I would trust with anything. He has my utmost confidence. It was Brian who urged me to write thank you letters, who encouraged me to be thoughtful and give wrapped gifts to not only cast members but the crew as well. Keep in mind, none of these suggestions from Brian were about networking or for my own self-gain within this career. They were simply about being kind, generous, thoughtful. Brian taught me how simple that could be and how rewarding as well. It was Brian who taught me why I should be interested in what was going on in the world. It angered him to no end when he found out that I never voted before. Brian is a wonderful, loving, funny human being who has never, ever made me feel anything less than lucky to be in his company. When I first heard the news of Brian's arrest, I couldn't breathe. I read on a Reddit post, and this is just someone giving their 2 cents, but someone pointed out that stating a response of "I couldn't breathe" read as almost like a trauma response. But again, it can also happen when you are extremely surprised by something. So I'm just stating what I had read on Reddit. I could not believe what was happening. It was unimaginable. I've known Brian for 14 years, and never once did I ever see any sign of him being capable of something like this. I have lived at his house for months and shared hotel rooms with him, and never once did he ever make me feel compromised or uncomfortable in any way. I don't know what it would take to have something like this occur, but whatever it is extremely out of character for Brian. I know Brian very well, and I know how much he has suffered since August of 2003. Let's pause. We're focusing on how much Brian has suffered. How much Brian has suffered. Because he got found out, because he got turned in, because I think for a split second he thought that his career in life was over, because he realized he could no longer violate Drake Bell. I think that's why he had suffered. It had nothing to do with feeling remorseful about what he had done. Brian is a good person with a very healthy fear and respect for the law, and I assure you, what Brian has been through in the last year is the suffering of 100 men. That is. I'm assuming, again, this is me assuming, James has never ever spoken with a survivor of SA. Ever. The suffering of 100 men. I don't intend to victimize Brian, nor would he ever wish that, but I do feel compelled to shed light on the fact that he has learned his lesson. I guarantee you the earth would fall from the sky before Brian would even think about doing something like this again. So again, people aren't stating that he didn't do it. And I guess, it would be very difficult for them to try and state that, to try and undo that, because, of course, as we all know from the documentary, Brian confessed to it all on a recorded phone call that he had with Drake. There's really no going back from that. So yeah, these people or their attorneys, whichever, I don't know who wrote the letters, are just doing their best to clean up. They're doing their best. I hope that you consider what I've stated here in your judgment. I owe to Brian Peck a lot of who I am and who I am proud to be. Sincerely, James Marsden. So while he's not involved with growing pains, I decided it would be best to put the letter here since James did meet him while Brian was working on growing pains. So next we have Home Free. That was in 1993. That was a television series, and what I found interesting was that Brian was on one episode of it. Dan Schneider was on like 13 episodes, but they weren't on an episode at the same time. I just thought that was strange. The next project is Angel 4 Undercover. That happened in 1994, or it was released in 1994. And Gary DePew had a bit role in that movie as well. Gary DePew is a name that we'll discuss later. The next project was Children of the Corn 3 Urban Harvest, and that was 1995. Now, the thing about Children of the Corn 3 is that it starred Ron Melendez. And if you don't know, Ron Melendez was one of the people that wrote a letter of support for Brian Peck. Now, at the time of the movie, he was 23 years old. So I think he was a little too old for Brian Peck, but regardless, they became friends. This movie did involve children because it's named Children of the Corn. So let's go over Ron's letter. Dear Judge Hoff, I have known Brian Peck for over 10 years. I met him on the set of my first film, and we became very good friends. This is not uncommon. Over the years I have known Brian, his circle of friends has grown larger and larger. His judgment is sought, his company valued, his honesty and hard work respected. Brian has been my very good friend since I met him. He has always been extremely generous with his time and energy, not just to me, but to all of his friends. And he has many. He is a hard worker, good at his job, dedicated to the industry he has loved since a teenager. I have lived with him, traveled with him, worked with him, and seen him in every possible situation. Have you? Because I don't think you have. And if you have, you're just as sick as he is. He is devoted to his friends and family, devoted to them above all else, always ready and willing to help them, to be the person that so many people wanted around, wanted to be able to call their friend. As I stated above, I lived with Brian, renting a room from him for over a year, first in 1999, then in 2001 to 2002. His house was my house, his friends my friends. I know the young man in question, had worked with him several years before. I watched the friendship between them grow and develop into what I saw as parental. I was shocked when anything more than that was first intimated. More than shocked when I heard of Brian's arrest. Brian is a good man. I believe a mistake was made, a large one on his part. But again, I also know the young man in question. Here we go. Yet again, an adult victim blaming a child. I have met his family, seen his behavior, and understood that there were problems. I saw him pursue a friendship with Brian, maintain their close ties, and saw his parents cede more and more of their parental duties to Brian. I saw the young man's employers, representatives, and finally even his parents look to Brian to take care of any problem that should arise with him. Brian made a large mistake, but it was not his alone. So now, okay, I'm going to take a breath. While I will be the first to admit that the adults in Drake's life should have been keeping a closer eye on him, should have been seeing these red flags that were popping up. So because, look, I do know how manipulators work. And this guy was able to charm nearly everyone that he came into contact with. So do I feel that Drake's mother was manipulated by him? I'm really just torn about this part right here because I find it disgusting that Ron Melendez is blaming the adults in Drake's life when I believe they were all hoodwinked by this sick and twisted pervert. I know people take issue with Drake's mom especially, but in the end, that is his mother, and he is going to love her regardless, and he does not blame her. So that I had to just kind of stop at that, stating it was not Brian's mistake alone. I will continue now. Brian is not a danger to society. I never, in all the time I have known him, seen him commit one illegal act. He is fastidiously law-abiding. I know he is aware of his mistake. I know he is conscious of its gravity. I know he will not make the same mistake again. Please give him the chance to prove all the qualities that I and many others have seen him display time and again. I come from a good family. That's great, Ron. We don't know your family. I doubt the judge does either. Have been fortunate enough to have 2 loving parents who instilled in me their values, who encouraged me and supported me when I pursued my dream of acting. I have worked in the entertainment industry since I was 16, the last 15 years. I live with my girlfriend of 3 years. Okay. Being a Los Angeles native, I am one of those rare and lucky few who have had their closest friends by their side since they were 8 or 12 or since high school. I believe a person can be judged by who he calls his friends. Brian Peck has been my friend for over 10 years. Please contact me if I can be of assistance. Sincerely, Ron Melendez. Okay, so that was Ron's letter. The next project was The Mommies. It was a television show, and he was involved in it in 1995. It involved kids. And what I found really interesting was that Shiloh Strong, the brother of Ryder Strong, was in this TV show. There's no proof, but it makes you wonder, how long has he known Ryder for? Since he met his brother, and I realized he was only on 1 episode. But it seems like people are just taken with this guy when they first meet him. So, Shiloh Strong, brother to Ryder Strong, who Peck later works with in Boy Meets World, and who later we will read a letter from since Ryder wrote a letter of support for Brian. But we'll discuss all that later. The next project was Public Enemies in 1996. James Marsden was a cast member on this one, and Brian played J. Edgar Hoover. That's it. That's all. The next project was The Tick. It was a cartoon. He did a voice in 1 episode in 1996. What I found interesting about this was that Kimmy Robertson was involved in this. Now, they met on a movie called The Last American Virgin back in 1982. And if you listen to Kimmy's letter, they were absolutely inseparable because they both played nerds and no one else on set wanted to hang out with them because they played nerds. So they just hung out with each other. So even though this is just the first time that we will discuss Kimmy, I will go ahead and I'll read her letter now. And just be prepared. I do believe that this is probably one of the most disturbing ones that has been released. And she is a huge supporter of victim blaming when it comes to her friends, I guess. To the Honorable Michael Hoff. I have known Brian since 1981. We were both in our first movie together. We both played nerds, so none of the other cast members talked to us because they thought we were really nerds. So we spent the 6 weeks it took to shoot the film, The Last American Virgin, together. I was struck by how nice Brian was. He was totally generous with his time and advice. I had never acted before, and he helped me do everything. After that, we became best friends and did all kinds of things together. We have become like family, sharing holidays at my house with his parents and my parents, going on vacations together, making our way in this business, and avoiding all the rotten people that are so attracted to acting and actors. Until now. I had the misfortune of working on blank TV show. I'll make this short. I noticed this young man kept asking me about Brian and generally being sleuth-like. I also noticed no gay male, i.e. makeup, hair, or PA, would be alone in a room with him. I knew that Brian was helping Redacted, but we now know Drake, with his new resume, and talked to Brian about this guy. Brian said he would never be alone with him or anyone under 21 ever again, that he had made amends and not to worry. Brian said he would never be alone with him or anyone under 21 ever again, that he had made amends and not to worry. I'm wondering if she meant to put that in there because that sounds an awful lot like something like this happened before, but it just didn't get to court. Did something like this happen before, Kimmy? I believe with all my heart that Brian was pressured and pushed beyond belief before he caved in with Drake. An outrageous, overtly gay, oversexed person with no idea what he is doing to Brian, Brian's family, and Brian's friends. He totally took advantage of Brian's willingness to help anyone who needs it. Now, I take issue here. The first thing I take issue with, outrageous, overtly gay. Now, I don't care about Drake Bell's sexuality. It doesn't matter if he's straight, gay, bisexual, doesn't matter. Let's say, even if he was whatever, gay or bisexual, he was 15, oversexed. I've never heard anyone describe a 15-year-old as outrageous, overtly gay, oversexed. She is just as disgusting as her friend. I beg of you to try and see the truth of this event. I ask you to interview any of Brian's friends. I wish you to talk to my friend Brian and see the rarity of an honest, sweet, and caring man. Please call me if you'd like. I am at your service and in defense of my friend Brian Peck. With kind regards and much faith, Kimmy Robertson. Now, when she referred to working on a TV show, that was The Amanda Show. I can't honestly remember if she was in that, but I do know for a fact that she was in an episode of the first season of Drake and Josh. And I believe when they were filming, I think, the first maybe couple episodes, I think Drake was having to still go through the trial. I could be completely off my timeline. If I am, feel free to correct me in the comments. But if I'm not off my timeline, even if this filming of Drake and Josh happened after the fact, why would you want to work with someone that's an outrageous, overtly gay, oversexed person that had no idea what he was doing to your friend Brian and that basically destroyed Brian's life? Why would you want to work on a show with that person? I mean, I know if it was me, I would avoid that type of person at all cost. You know, these people had the nerve, and I say these people because there are more that we will learn that wrote letters and had the nerve to work with Drake after the fact, and Drake not knowing at that time that they had written these letters of support. I don't believe he did. I don't believe he found out about the letters until just last year. Again, if I am incorrect, please feel free to correct me. But I find it appalling that they were able to work with him, knowing what happened to him. Not to like the graphic, horrific extent, because I'm sure Brian didn't share that. Knowing that they had written letters of support for someone that had harmed this kid. And were just able to work with him like it was nothing. The next project was Good Burger in 1997. Keenan and Kel starred in that. Both of them were 19 at the time. It was co-written by Dan Schneider, and Brian had a bit role. I've not ever seen Good Burger. If I did, it was like an extremely long time ago, but I do believe that children were involved in it. And I'm thinking this must have been the beginning of Brian's relationship with Nickelodeon. This is, I believe, probably what started it all. Because after Good Burger, he was involved in Keenan and Kel in 1997 again. Of course, Dan Schneider was the writer. There were children involved. He was in one episode. The next project was Guys Like Us, and he was in a 1998 and 1999 episode. This show did involve kids. It was created by Dan Schneider, and in one of the episodes, he played a character called Mr. Happy Pants the Clown. Now knowing of his relationship with John Wayne Gacy makes that fact all the more disturbing. It gives you the ick. Following that was Boy Meets World in 1999. We don't know for a fact if that's where he was introduced to Ryder Strong and Will Friedle, but they they stuck up for their buddy, Brian Peck, as well. Now, he was only in 2 episodes, but if you listen to the Boy Meets World cast and have read any articles that have been done on them since this all came out, he was also a dialogue coach on the show, which is interesting because if you check out his IMDb page and his Wikipedia, that's not listed. And oddly enough, it wasn't listed for growing pains either. So I'm kind of confused on that one, because even if you look at shows on IMDb like The Amanda Show, he is listed under additional crew as a dialogue coach. But for some reason on those shows, he wasn't listed. So I'm not sure if that was just missed or if it was intentionally scrubbed. So here is Ryder Strong's letter. Dear Judge Hoff, I first met Brian Peck when he came to work on the ABC situation comedy I had been starring in since I was 13, Boy Meets World. Brian joined our crew and instantly brightened up the set with his intelligence, wit, and good humor. Brian and I quickly developed a strong friendship outside of work and merged our circle of friends. Brian is undoubtedly one of the funniest people I have ever met. Unlike most funny people, however, Brian does not harbor any desperate or depressed feelings for which his humor compensates. He is intelligent, well-informed, and very straightforward. I can engage in political debates with him just as easily as I can share jokes with him or listen to his limitless knowledge of film history. He is an educated and talented actor, director, and dialogue coach. Brian has always maintained a family-like community of actors, artists, and people from all walks of life. Such a community is rare in this world, but exponentially rare in the entertainment industry. He gives undying support to his friends, offering his advice and contacts, and helping many a career get started. Personally, he has showed up at every screening, theatrical play, or event of my career, and has given me free coachings for audition. Well, then you know that the guy is A-OK. He's giving you free coachings. He did the same for James Marsden. He is one of the most dependable people I have had the pleasure of calling my friend. Too often, particularly in entertainment, people befriend others for their personal gain or what connections they can make. There is something to be said for the fact that Brian has become very close with my good friends who are not famous or even involved with the industry. It is sad but true that I cannot say the same for many of the other people I have befriended at the workplace. It was extremely disturbing to learn of Brian's arrest. Maliciousness is so antithetical to his nature. It is impossible for me to comprehend a situation that would lead him to do something illegal or even inappropriate. I immediately called him and offered whatever support I could. Of course, Brian being Brian, had already received numerous such calls. I am convinced that if granted probation, Brian would not disappoint the court. He is an outstanding human being with a great capacity to learn from this difficult experience. He will overcome because I know his true character is an optimistic and strong spirit. For your information, I have been a professional actor for the last 15 years, more than half my life. I have produced and starred in numerous films, stage, and television projects. I have also taken time off from acting to pursue my education. Last month, I received a degree in English literature from Columbia University. I have utilized my position as a famous person to be the best role model I can. I have produced and directed several educational videos which appear in schools throughout California. I have served as the national ambassador for the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, and I give talks regularly, most recently regarding conflict resolution to 5th graders in Harlem, and last week I gave the commencement address at a public high school in my hometown. I am writing this letter because I believe Brian as a person, not just a friend. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions or need more information. Sincerely, Ryder Strong. The next one is from Will Friedel, who is also in Boy Meets World. To the Honorable Michael Hoff. My name is Will Friedel, and I am writing to you on behalf of my good friend Brian Peck, whom I have known on both a professional and social level for the past 7 years. And quite frankly, sir, I never in my wildest imagination thought that I would find myself having to defend such an honest and ethical friend like Brian. I moved to Los Angeles in early 1993 to co-star on a family sitcom for ABC and was fortunate enough to have met Brian on the set a few years later. The show revolved around a young boy and his family. Needless to say, sir, the entire set was full of children, and throughout the seasons, I can honestly attest to the fact that at no time, in no way whatsoever, did I ever witness Brian behaving inappropriately with anyone. As a matter of fact, Brian was so professional and so good at his job that when the show wrapped after 7 seasons, I asked him to join the crew of a new show that I was starring on. When that show failed, I asked Brian to come with me yet again to a new set, and so on. I was given the opportunity to witness firsthand the type of man Brian was, and seldom have I met a person of such moral fiber. Brian has always shown himself to be a man of integrity and honor. He has always held himself up to the highest standards, and in recent visits with him, I have never seen him more ashamed of himself or the charges against him. I can only stress and honestly state that Brian must have felt an overwhelming sense of pressure and temporary loss of reason. It would be a case of a very good person slipping. There could be no malice in his heart, no attempt at corruption, just a horrible lapse in judgment, the ramifications of which Brian is fully willing to accept. You know, they flashed up on the screen during Quiet on Set the original charges that Brian Peck faced, even though he ended up not getting punished for all of those charges. I have an extremely difficult time swallowing that he had an overwhelming sense of pressure and temporary loss of reason, that he was slipping. Definitely don't believe that he had no malice in his heart. I believe that he definitely wanted to corrupt. I don't believe it was a horrible lapse of judgment. While I am a layman when it comes to the law, I do understand that it exists for essentially 2 reasons: punishment and the safety of our society. Sir, I can only emphatically state that, knowing Brian as I do, if he were granted probation, nothing like this would ever happen again. I can only reiterate how devastated Brian is, and how these past events have forever changed him. Brian is the one devastated. Brian is the one changed. It's like these people have just completely forgotten about the 15-year-old boy he harmed. It's not even on their radar. They're not even concerned with it. If ever there is a man who deserves another chance, it is Brian Peck. Given the opportunity, I know that he would do everything in his power to show the world his true character, the man that I have come to know and respect. If I can be of any further assistance, please feel free to contact me. Sincerely yours, Will Friedel. Now, I will state that on his Twitter, Drake confirmed that he and Ryder Strong had talked and that all was forgiven. So I guess we'll let Ryder slide for this one. Since Drake has forgiven him, that's really all that matters. Will, on the other hand, Will supplied voice acting in Ultimate Spider-Man, which Drake Bell was a part of. He did the voice of Peter Parker. Never once did Will say anything. And from how Ryder has talked, Ryder stated something about how when they saw who walked in, he realized he was on the wrong side. I'm guessing possibly both Ryder and Will were present in that courtroom. And according to Drake, during Ultimate Spider-Man, not a word was said. Now, I realize that is an extremely uncomfortable topic to bring up. I do not know how one would start out by apologizing for supporting the PDF file that harmed you. I'm not quite sure how that conversation begins, but I'm sure that Will could have at least tried. They were both adults at that time. The next project was X-Men. That was in 2000. Now, this one's good. This one was directed by a man named Brian Singer. Brian Singer has been accused of R several times by several different men, boys at the time. I know one was settled out of court. I don't think the other ones went any further, and I think charges were dropped. But the fact remains, he settled out of court on that first one. And I want to know why. So already, huge red flag. You got Bryan Singer and Brian Peck on the same film set. This one also starred James Marsden. I believe he played Cyclops. And a man named Tom DeSanto was a producer on that movie. And Brian and Tom met via James. Now, Tom DeSanto wrote a letter of support for Brian Peck. And here's what it says. To the Honorable Michael Hoff, I am writing this letter in regards to Brian Peck. I have known Brian since he came to visit his friend, actor James Marsden, on the set of X-Men in November of 1999. X-Men is a film which I co-wrote and produced. Since then, Brian has become a close personal friend, and I have worked with him professionally as an actor on both X-Men and X-Men 2, X-Men United. It was with shock and dismay that I learned of Brian's arrest because that is not the Brian that I know. The Brian Peck that I know is a man who is always there when a friend is in need. The Brian Peck I know is the best man at James Marsden's wedding and a well-respected and loved professional who has worked in the entertainment industry for over 20 years. That is why his arrest was so surprising and totally out of character. He has worked with actors as a coach for many years with never one whisper of improper conduct. His actors speak of him in the highest regard and continue their friendship even after the working relationship has ended. It was through Brian's job as an acting coach on Nickelodeon's The Amanda Show that I met, as we know, Drake Bell, that I met Redacted. Father had brought Redacted, which I'm assuming is Drake Bell, and his high school bandmates to the Sunset Room, a nightclub bar in Hollywood, to hear his band in Orange County with Brian Peck. Drake always came across as very mature yet complex. I'm not sure what he means by that. Mature yet complex. It was my observation that Drake was dealing with a lot of personal issues, and Brian was someone he could talk to. Drake seemed to be acting one way in front of his family and another around his friends, coworkers, and classmates. This included having lunch with Brian, Drake, and someone Drake referred to as his boyfriend. Yet he wasn't able to introduce his boyfriend to his family. Drake also seemed to be very fearful of his father and unable to communicate with him whatever sexual issues he was going through at the time. Again, I want to know why Drake's sexuality at the age of 15 is even being addressed by these people, because it doesn't matter what his sexuality was or is. He was essayed by an adult that he was supposed to be able to trust. I don't know if these people are trying to make his family look as bad as they can to take the heat off of Brian. I think from the documentary, it was made quite clear that Drake's father absolutely loves him, that he was absolutely heartbroken when the decision was made that he was not going to be in Drake's life because Drake had been continuously manipulated. I just find it extremely bothersome that these adults are mentioning his sexuality as if that makes any difference. I know Brian is ashamed and remorseful about his lapse of judgment. Again, lapse of judgment. Either these people got together in a room and wrote these letters at the same time, or attorneys drafted up these letters. I'm not sure which one, and has been in therapy to better himself. No one has been tougher on Brian than himself, and he is working every day to make up for his mistakes. He is trying to pull his life back together and contribute as a productive member of society. I fear if he is given jail time that not only will his physical well-being be in danger, but that emotionally and mentally it will be counterproductive. Well, yes, physical danger, definitely, because I think we all know what happens when people that mess with kids end up in prison, and it's found out why they're in prison. How Brian Peck escaped prison without some major damage done to him, I think that kind of speaks volumes. People that have messed with children are the lowest on the food chain when in prison. That's just a fact. So I'm wondering if he got some kind of special treatment to make sure that he was safe. I feel that Brian can make up for the mistakes he has made by giving back to society through community service. Yes, that is exactly what is going to help Drake Bell. That's exactly the kind of punishment Brian Peck needs in order for Drake Bell to be healed emotionally. Community service. I know Brian has learned from his mistakes, and if I had children, I would be 100% comfortable leaving them in his care. I hope the court sees that jail time may be detrimental to his continued therapy and be a step back. Please feel free to call me if you need to discuss anything further. Sincerely, Thomas DeSanto. Now, I do feel the need to state that Ryder Strong, who we know apologized to Drake, Will Friedle, and Thomas DeSanto, I read in an article, had walked back their support. They walked back their letters because they apparently didn't know what was truly done at the time. This is becoming a theme. So either Brian Peck lied to everyone and absolutely none of them did their research, or these people are just now trying to save face. I do find it quite interesting that, and I know I keep saying that, quite interesting, but I do, that James Marsden's not said anything. He's not publicly acknowledged his letter. So, still on X-Men, I found out through a Reddit thread that Brian Peck played a hot dog vendor. But oddly enough, he did the commentary track with Bryan Singer for the film. Now, I'm sorry, I was under the impression that when commentary tracks were done, it was usually like the lead stars in the movie. I know that there are commentaries where some of the crew, like the main crew, joins in. Brian Peck's only role in X-Men was that he was a hot dog vendor. I have a feeling that him and Bryan Singer hung out a lot. I may do a video on Bryan Singer, because I've heard things about him. It's not things that I can confirm or deny, but there have been videos done on him. And the things that I've heard are not good. We're talking parties that are like filled with underage boys and middle-aged men. It makes you wonder, did Brian Peck ever attend any of Bryan Singer's parties, if those parties did indeed occur? Because I don't know how you go from playing a hot dog vendor in one small scene to doing the commentary with the director of the film. I'm not the only one that found that strange. There were a lot of people on Reddit that were like, WTF, I don't get it. The next project was The Amanda Show, and that is where Drake's life changed forever. Of course, we know that was created by Dan Schneider. On it, Brian was a dialogue coach, and he acted in at least one episode. Now, two names that you may know are Beth Correll, who was a second stage manager for 10 shows, and Rich Correll, who directed 14 episodes. They also wrote letters in support of their dear friend Brian Peck. So here's the one from Beth. Dear Judge Hoff, I am one of the former assistant directors of, it's redacted, have worked in the television industry for over 8 years. I have primarily worked on shows with children as either lead or supporting actors. On the majority of those shows, Brian Peck and I have worked together. I first met Brian in 1997. We worked together almost nonstop until August of 2003. Brian was an asset on any set on which he has worked. He is patient, kind, and generous, and as a teacher and dialogue coach, has helped many young actors improve their skills. He has always conducted himself as a professional. I have never heard improper language used or witnessed inappropriate or questionable conduct from Brian Peck in the presence of children. In 1999, while working on The Amanda Show, I met Drake. I have worked with Drake until April 2004 on virtually every project he has ever done for Nickelodeon. During that time, I witnessed a boy with some talent turn into a young man with incredible stage presence, and due in large part to Brian Peck's efforts, a star quality emerged. Drake turned into a personable, self-confident performer. So it was all Brian Peck's doing and assistance that led Drake to be the great performer that he is, according to Beth. It had absolutely nothing to do with Drake. Okay, we'll remember that. I must admit that I was surprised. Something is redacted, and I'm not quite sure I understand. I was surprised, redacted, behavior after hearing of this case and the charges being brought against Brian. Nothing seemed to change in him at all. On set, he continued to be playful with other cast members and crew. He was always talking about his band and music and appeared to be excited about his future, the show, and his musical career. He even moved into his own apartment. On more than one occasion, while watching her son perform on the set of Redacted, Mother Robin would say to me, "Look at him. I am so proud of how mature and responsible he is." I'm not quite sure what her point of including all that was. There are people in this world that are very good at hiding their pain because they feel like they have to, because they want to try to bury it. And I believe that is exactly what Drake was doing. He was trying to bury it. He has stated that some of the most fun times were while filming Drake and Josh. So of course he was having fun. Of course he was playful. I don't quite understand why she felt the need to add that. Okay. When I heard of Brian's arrest, I was shocked, to say the least. I never knew Brian to engage in any type of illegal activity at all. Making my living working with children, had I thought that Brian was engaged in anything inappropriate, sexual or illegal, I would have spoken out immediately. I understand that the court may order probation for Brian. I have known Brian for many years as both a coworker and friend, and I believe that he would comply with all of the conditions of probation should it be granted. Brian is an honest, law-abiding man who would do what is necessary to move forward with his life. This man is not a predator. Thank you for taking the time to read this, and if I can be of any further assistance, please contact me. Sincerely, Beth Dempsey Correll. Next, we'll read Rich Correll's. Dear Judge Hoff, I'm writing you this letter to let you know that Brian Peck has been not only a friend, but also an associate of mine for the past 19 years. I say associate because it's been my pleasure to direct shows that Brian has been a crew member on, and I assure you, a crew member of the highest integrity, professional behavior, and flawless workmanship. I have a producing, directing background of over 621 TV episodes, and Brian was the finest dialogue coach I ever worked with. Loved and respected by his peers, Brian's presence on stage always brought an added boost to the day's work. I think you should also know that Brian was the #1 most requested dialogue coach among the young thespians that I directed, and easily the most popular and trusted among their parents. His loyalty and willingness to help a fellow actor or crew member was also outstanding. Many times I've seen him perform above and beyond the call of duty, and it would be my pleasure to not only work with him again, but also to recommend him for any future work. I would be honored to attach my name to his recommendation. I'm aware of the charges being brought against Brian. I must tell you honestly that Brian is a kind, fair, honest man who deserves a second chance, and who I believe is aware of the mistake he's made, and will forever make good on a chance to prove himself worthy of the leniency of the court. Please consider probation for Brian. I assure you, actually guarantee you, that Brian is a man of his word and will never dishonor an agreement made with the court. He has taken full responsibility for his mistake and will be forever regretful of it. Please give him a chance to make good on his word of rehabilitation and display that his restitution is real. Thank you for your time and consideration in this matter. Should you ever need to contact me for further information of my knowledge and recommendation of Brian's character, please don't hesitate to do so. Sincerely, Rich Correll. These are people that worked closely with Drake. These are people that Drake trusted. I'm almost positive they probably didn't show up in court. I think anyone that had to keep working with Drake didn't show up in court. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there were some ballsy enough to do that. The next project was All That, 2000 to 2002, and on that he played a character called Pickle Boy. Now you might remember seeing him carrying around a huge platter of pickles piled high. And in one clip that they showed on Quiet on Set, it was when Ray Romano was guest starring on All That, and he was locked in his dressing room and was hungry, and there was a hole where the doorknob was supposed to be. And so Pickle Boy went ahead and put a pickle through that hole. I think my explanation of that pretty much can leave you to draw your own conclusion as to what they were referring to. Kids wouldn't have gotten it. Adults, on the other hand. So Brian was dialogue coach also for 4 episodes. Rich Correll also directed some episodes. And Beth Correll was stage manager and second stage manager on some episodes. So they stuck together. In 2003, Brian was involved in a movie called Holes. I don't like the name, especially when it is tied to this person. But this movie involved a group of young boys. I will leave it at that. I think we know why Brian Peck wanted to work on the movie Holes. Another in 2003 was X-Men 2. He played a news reporter. We're dealing with the same people that were dealt with during the original X-Men. So you've got Tom DeSanto, you've got Bryan Singer, and you've got James Marsden. They're all still buddies. Now, during 2002 to 2003, he was on 2 episodes of What I Like About You, which was a Dan Schneider created show for Amanda Bynes. So all of this was before the arrest and the court hearing. There are several things which you may not know if you haven't listened to any of Drake's interviews that he has done. Bell describes getting access to alcohol at parties at Peck's house. Bell considers the provision of alcohol as a way to take advantage of him in an inhibited state. He can't confirm or deny the presence of drugs, though he does hesitantly allude to it and says it got really dark. So I think it's safe to say we can make the assumption that Brian Peck provided these young actors with drugs for his own dark and twisted pleasure. Now, on a podcast, Drake described his experience reading the letters of support for the first time as an adult. The letters claim Peck must have been tempted by Bell, to which Bell begins defending what he was wearing, saying, "What did I do? I just woke up to this." The fact that he would even have to feel like he has to defend himself by stating that is really messed up. Drake Bell did absolutely nothing wrong. It wouldn't matter how much Drake Bell hung around Brian Peck, because Brian Peck was the adult in the situation. So even with all of these scenarios that you could possibly try to conjure up, it still doesn't work. I think that is where I'm going to end this part. I think this is a good stopping point because this covers pre-trial, aside from the letters, but I wanted to keep those for continuity. I wanted to address those letters as we discussed the people that he worked with. It just fascinates me that people can still continue to basically virtually mob a person who's trying to heal themselves, who's trying to rehabilitate themselves, who's trying to heal from trauma that they never allowed themselves to heal from before. And yet, instead of going after these creeps and these weirdos that are actually causing harm to these children, you're spending your time and energy on someone that is just trying to exist. I realize that anyone that would need to hear that most likely isn't listening, but I still feel the need to say it because it's disgusting. And as a society, it's worrisome.
I'm curious, after the arrest, after this happened, did anyone at Nickelodeon, any executives talk to you, reach out to you?
I'm not really certain how many people knew who it was.